Hello and welcome to this IOE Coffee Break about how we can better support young people's wellbeing. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Dr. Sandy Leaton-Gray, Associate Professor of Education at the IOE and your chair this afternoon. Now, we all know that as the COVID-19 pandemic has progressed, mounting evidence has highlighted its marked impact on children and young people's mental health. So this afternoon, we've brought together two experts to discuss how families and schools can support social and emotional well-being during these unusual times. Once I've introduced our speakers, I'll kick things off with a couple of questions. But we're here to respond to your comments and questions, so please share those throughout using the Q&A function on Slido. You can also tweet about the experience and the discussion using the hashtag IOE Coffee Breaks. To introduce our speakers, we have Dr. Lisa Fridkin, who is a developmental psychologist and lecturer in the IOE Social Research Institute. Her research investigates the interactions between emotional well-being, motivation, risk, and resilience, including in relation to learning. Alongside, we have Dr. Katie Kwai, a lecturer in psychology, also based in the IOE Social Research Institute. Katie's research combines quantitative and qualitative methodologies to explore child behaviour and development, including coping and resilience, oppositional behaviour, and the role of parenting. Both Lisa and Katie have been examining the impact of COVID-19 on the social and emotional well-being of children. Now, to start off with, I'd like to ask you both, what are the main signs of poor mental health that families and schools are likely to be seeing among young people at the moment, including as they adjust to being back in the classroom? Lisa, can I ask you that?
Sure. Hello, everyone, and thanks very much, Sandra, for the introduction. So I think sort of to frame an answer to that, we might want to think about the fact that we have a basic human need to feel safe and secure and to know what's ahead and to have our basic needs being met. And the pandemic's come along and kind of thrown that out of the window for all of us and brought levels of insecurity to everyone. It's bringing a threat of an element of threat or risk to our daily well-being, our happiness, and our ability to function in what we would see as our normal way successfully. And I think we need to see that our lives are typically embedded in sort of multiple interlinked systems. So children have experienced a pretty dramatic change to their daily life and their routines, to their school and their environment, where they've lost their typical protective factors that would typically boost their well-being. So that might be when we talk about their protective factors, there's all our individual characteristics about who we are, but also external resources that support or improve our response to stressful situations and therefore mitigate any negative effects of adversity. So typically in school, children are used to experiencing success and well-being because they might be told that they're doing well, they achieve things, they might be having a laugh with their friends and their positive relationships with school staff. And protective factors outside of school, so extended family relationships and friendships, and the time that they spend with their grandparents, maybe in childcare, their exercise and sports and clubs. And they've been thrown into a situation of anxiety. So they've had these protective factors removed, and then they're feeling anxious, depending on their age, maybe about the pandemic themselves, but maybe about the health and well-being of their own family members. And then there can be lots of other things, socioeconomic factors where family members may have lost jobs, or their parents may have be experiencing a lot of anxiety. And then there's been increased anxiety because the situation for children, there's been a lot of uncertainty where they've been in school, out of school, back in school with specific measures in place, wearing masks, not wearing masks, and those measures might be quite different to what they're experiencing in the outside world. So masks not in school, but masks if they go into a shop for example, with their parents. So then if we look at what then happens when they're back in the classroom, they've got this adjustment to then suddenly being back in the environment that they would, that might feel very unfamiliar. They might be in a new class with new classmates. And I think, therefore, all children are having to adjust and might show signs of difficulty in those experiences. So I think if we're talking about where we are now, at this stage in the pandemic, we might see emotional problems, so feeling unwell, tummy aches in younger children, or headaches, being tired or not sleeping well or sleeping too much, and maybe being angry or restless, finding it difficult to engage, maybe feeling isolated from their friends and other people around them. But I think what I would say is that it might be a change in behaviour that we might look for. And I think we should perhaps anticipate and expect there to be a change in behaviour, because children are readjusting back to their school setting. And yes, and I think generally from the literature, it's saying that's coming out now is that children across and young people across all age groups are experiencing those kinds of displays of behaviour. But I would also sort of couch that in the idea that we need to think about the fact that a lot of things like that, so that are related to developmental change anyway, so they don't necessarily indicate specific poor well-being. And we shouldn't necessarily automatically feel concerned if our child is a bit less engaged or is a little bit more isolated, or experiencing tearful episodes. I think it's more if it's a prolonged and long-term experience of those things.
Thank you. And Katie, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I would really just echo what Lisa was saying about how this pandemic has really highlighted and deepened inequalities as well. So we're not all experiencing the impacts of the pandemic on our well-being in the same way, and that's even more true for children who have a lot less control over their environment as well. So they're experiencing all of these things, but they don't have the same kind of tools as adults might have to mitigate the effects of what they're experiencing on them. So it's really important to be aware of those. And what the literature is telling us as it comes out is that particular groups of children who are already quite vulnerable, children living in circumstances of lower economic status, LGBTQ plus children and young people, children of colour as well, are all experiencing heightened impacts of this pandemic that we really need to be aware of. So the children that maybe were having some problems before, those problems certainly aren't going away, and for many they might be actually getting a little bit worse. But again, all of this is with the caveat, though, that, if you're concerned about your child and how they're adjusting, just because they're demonstrating some or all of the things that Lisa is talking about, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have, a major mental health issue. We're all going through this huge period of transition and uncertainty and adaptation, and it's okay for there to be some bumps in the road on the way. We can't be expected to kind of glide through this situation completely unaffected, and it might even be a little bit worrying if we did.
So obviously the spectrum of child development and typical behaviour is fairly huge, isn't it, at the best of times?
Absolutely.
And both of you have said that, there's a lot that's normal, if you like, but being put in a really difficult situation and then working out ways to behave within that, and we all have to do that. But I'm wondering whether there are signs that are less obvious that might fall under the radar, where there is a pathology where people should be thinking about maybe going to the GP or something like that.
I think, again, this is a tricky one, because children and young people can be very, very good at covering up their feelings and covering up their struggles, particularly in a situation like the one we have going on at the moment, where they see the adults around them being quite worried. They might be concerned about adding to the burden that the people who look after them are already experiencing. They feel like they're already under pressure, and they don't want to kind of make things worse. But again, I think some things that you might be seeing are more challenging behaviour, particularly in younger children. They might be reaching out and asking for help more than usual. And this might be particularly true for teenagers and older children. They might not necessarily be asking you to help with the kind of emotional stuff, but they might be looking for help in other ways, as a way to sort of start a conversation. And maybe they're not too sure how to do it. They might be coming a little bit more kind of controlling in other ways. So it might be around things like food, around sleep, around coming, very fussy, things like that. Again, these aren't necessarily signs of an underlying pathology, but it's when those behaviours become more kind of sustained and consistent, and you really see something different going on as well. And I think a really key thing to look out for is when the usual things that we do to make ourselves feel better when we feel bad stop working. When everyone has coping strategies, whether it be reading a book or engaging in exercise or speaking to friends, but when we stop going to those strategies, or when they stop working for us or working for our children, that's when it's time to be concerned.
So presumably then it's when it also dominates everyday life a bit, perhaps.
Exactly, when it starts causing sort of significant impairment. I mean, lots of us and lots of children might feel more, a bit more emotional. They might be quicker to anger at the moment. They might be a little bit more tearful, but when it's sort of starting to take over their lives, or interfere with friendships, or making it difficult for them to study or even go to school, or causing lots of arguments in the family, then you think maybe, now might be the time to reach out for external help. And there is a lot of help available. Your first point of call might be the school, might be your GP. There are excellent charities out there like Young Minds, which have some really good strategies for families to start looking at these kinds of things as well. And something that seems to be coming out as well.
Can I just interrupt? So where would people, I just want to interrupt, where would people find maybe a list of that? Is there a good place for them to start if they've got a worry and they want some ideas about organisations they can contact?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would start with Young Minds, particularly because they have resources both for young people and for parents who are concerned about young people. And they've also got some sort of signposting pages as well that can tell you the different types of places you would go. And, some really helpful resources there as well that you can find just on their websites. Huge fan.
That's really useful, thank you. Lisa, I want to ask you a question that we've had come in from a member of the public, Louise. And Louise would like to know whether introverted and extroverted children suffer differently regarding their well-being during COVID, and whether they need different kinds of support.
I think that's a really interesting question. I don't know that I can completely answer that in terms of personality related to coping and support that we need. I think we all need the same support to a certain extent as individuals. And I think we all need, I think one thing that I would say that we need to be aware of is that we're not all comfortable, and this might relate a little bit to that, in verbalizing how we feel. And Katie was talking before, and we've been talking a bit about how if we are struggling a little bit with our well-being, that it can manifest in different ways. And I think within that, the other thing to be aware of is that our risk response is cumulative. So we might be coping quite well actually with the return to school now and not showing any problems, but adolescence, for example, is a vulnerable time anyway, where mental health is a red flag a little bit, or can be. And so I think we need to be aware as parents and teachers in schools of just being aware that actually this could be something that starts a process, and keep an eye that maybe with challenges ahead, those may actually feel a lot more difficult because we've just all dealt with the pandemic as well. And I think in terms of support, I think it's about opening up dialogue, which can actually feel quite difficult as a parent. Sometimes we don't necessarily feel that we have the right words to talk to children, and we don't actually always understand the problems and see those problems in the same way. And Katie sort of mentioned before that children can get quite good at covering things up. So I think that there will be certain groups, children who have just moved into a new setting, where teachers don't know them very well. I think we'd want to keep an eye on them. But I think it's also important, because we don't always have the right words, to not be dismissive towards our children, that, whatever it is that they're expressing, because they might try to show that they're having a hard time in all kinds of different ways. And we can also acknowledge as parents that it's difficult for us to find the right words to talk about things. And actually the important thing is that we're there to listen, to whatever it is that they want to talk to us about. Because I think by fostering a dialogue with our child and opening up those channels of communication, so that even though we don't always have the answers, I think as parents and actually teachers as well, we feel that we always have to fix things and make things better, and that when somebody comes to us with a problem, we have to be able to find a solution to that problem. And actually we can't always give a solution. So I think it's about being honest about that, and actually recognizing and acknowledging that having the dialogue and the conversation and listening to what somebody is saying is just as important sometimes as to know that you're in it with somebody else. Certainly that was something that came up a lot. We've been doing some work with undergraduate students who have been feeling very isolated as well. And one of the things that they mentioned a lot was that social isolation, not knowing how other people are feeling, and not knowing that other people are feeling anxiety too about all, their work, their friendships, what lies ahead. So actually, regardless of your personality type, I think what we need in terms of well-being is emotional support, a sense of feeling socially connected to other people around us, and feeling those boosts that we're doing okay, actually, in spite of everything that's going on.
But that's quite a lot of work for teachers, isn't it? They're going to be faced with pupils who are having a really difficult time. It's bad enough at the best of times, isn't it? It's a busy job. So you've got heightened difficulties across more pupils, and a lot of strain associated with that. And I'm wondering whether you have any thoughts, Lisa, on how teachers could look after their own well-being in this context.
Okay, well, I think we really owe a debt to our teachers, and we need to take much better care of our teachers. As you've absolutely said there, our teachers are not trained to deal with the kinds of difficulties. They're not trained to deal with pupils' emotional difficulties, particularly anyway, or trauma. And there's certainly, some of our children will have had a very difficult time. And some of them will have experienced bereavements, either in their close or, family or friends. And teachers aren't trained to deal with that. I think on top of that, we also need to remember that, teachers have barely had a break throughout the pandemic. I actually don't know how they've managed. They've had to work, many of them, through holidays, looking after key worker children, anyway, keeping tabs on track and trace, who's contracted COVID, notifying families, keeping up with changes to how schools are operating, putting measures in place for how lessons will be delivered, keeping staff and pupils safe, reassuring parents, and then teachers have had their normal day job of planning their lessons, but they have had maybe limited resources because you can't touch textbooks or use all of the normal classroom methods that they might use. They've had to plan across multiple platforms at the drop of a hat. And actually back in the classroom now, they're having to deliver face-to-face teaching. If children are isolating, they're having to also give online access and make sure that their lessons are suitable for online access. But of course, some children won't have access to technology, and so they have to have work set that they can do. And then, I mean, I feel tired just talking about that. But on top of that, they've also had to deal with their own personal life and the concerns that all of us are facing. So their health, isolation, family concerns, if they've got their own children, parents. I mean, just shopping sometimes at the beginning of the pandemic was just such hard work. I know that sounds very trivial, but and then they've also had this quite critical narrative from the media towards teachers. So I do think teachers have had a difficult time. And now back in the classroom, they may well have not the same social support that they would normally have from colleagues in the same way, because they can't mix in the same way in classrooms, and they will not have access to the same resources. So they're planning. So they've got an increased workload. They've not had their usual breaks that they would be having. And as you've said, Sandra, they're also dealing with children who are perhaps also having some difficulty adjusting. And then I haven't even mentioned all of the extra exam classes that they've had to prepare and marking that they've had to do. So in terms of self-care, I really think that teachers need some time off. I think they need to do the same as any age group, and they need to step back. They need to make sure that they're making time for themselves, that they're looking after themselves, that they are getting a good diet, exercise, that they've got a good routine going, that they're doing hobbies and things that taking time to make themselves happy, and actually stopping work and reading a book or doing gardening, watching TV or a DVD, and talking where they can, so that they understand that this is a relentless experience that they're having, that other colleagues are experiencing the same. And, you know, I think actually I think they need to be kind to themselves. And I think we as parents need to recognize the hard time that our teachers are having and be kind to our children's teachers, and look after them, because, you know, burnout is a serious issue. And it's 15 months that they have been on a treadmill, actually, with very little let up in that time.
So we're having a lot of questions coming from members of the public now. They're flying in. So, you know, one member of the public asked, do the Young Minds type resources really help parents start those conversations? It's so difficult. Katie, I'm wondering, where can people start? Obviously, they'll have read the websites and so on, but what's the first thing that you say?
Well, I think that is a really, really good question. And it's something that I, as a parent, have struggled with as well, because they do give you those lists of questions and things that you can try and talk, you know, tell me what the best thing that happened to you today is, tell me if there's anything that made you feel sad, those kinds of things. But not all children are willing to engage with those kinds of questions. They don't all find it easy to identify even the kinds of feelings that they're having. And I'm thinking particularly of younger children. So something that can be really, really helpful is to, rather than thinking of it in terms of, let's sit down and have a discussion, we're going to have a really important conversation about your feelings and what I can do to understand them and fix you in some way, is to try and embed it in something day to day, in an activity, in something a little bit more fun. And, you know, starting that kind of interaction can make a space then for you to have those kinds of conversations. you know, during the first lockdown, I started doing Couch to 5K with my 8-year-old, and we ran around the local area and talked about Harry Potter mostly. And, you know, in great depth, I occasionally had to come home and Google some of the answers to his questions. But it was also a really nice space where it was just the two of us. And he would also talk about, you know, worries that he had and things that he didn't understand about what was going on at that time. And I'm thinking back when we weren't allowed to see anybody at all, and, you know, trying to get a handle on the whole situation. So it really gave us a space that if I'd sat down at the kitchen table with him and said, you know, tell me, how do you feel? What kind of worries do you have? We wouldn't have had the same conversation. So I think trying to do it in a less formal way, spending time together and doing activities, doing things you enjoy. For older teenagers, young people, it might be things like cooking, watching a film, talking about your favorite music, just strengthening those relationships and the bond that you have together can make space for those other conversations to come out without you having to say, right, tell me how you feel.
Yeah, I'm thinking, when you were saying that, I was thinking of all the conversations I've had with my kids in the car, actually going from A to B, where you're not even looking at each other and suddenly they tell you stuff, you know, and so that's quite a fertile space, perhaps. You know, it happens in an unexpected way sometimes. So more questions. Can I
just say something, Sandra, there as well? Another good thing, because listening to Katie with the Couch to 5K story, one thing, I thought my son was doing pretty well, and then he wrote a poem. He'd been asked to write a poem about the pandemic, and you know, it was really quite powerful and quite upsetting. So I think that's another thing, you know, when children express themselves through creative writing or you know, through a picture, and I think exactly what Katie's saying, it's through those. It's not about having specific conversations, it's about shared activities and hopefully positive experiences together. And then actually, when I read this poem that my son has written, I said, you know, there were some anxieties coming out in that very clearly. And, you know, and it led to us to have a conversation then about why he'd written a particular line and is that how he saw things. And I think that actually can also be a really good way into a conversation like that.
Thank you. Katie, one of the members of the public questions that we've had in, what can we do during the summer holidays to prepare our children for the next pandemic and any possible uncertainty that might be going on? And I think perhaps also the next academic year.
Okay, I think this is a concern for a lot of parents, and there's sort of two sides to it there. In terms of the next academic year, there's a lot of concern about what our children have missed out on academically, that they might need to catch up on things. And I think that that's a really natural concern for parents, but I think that maybe we're focusing on the wrong thing there, because when you think about it, you know, catch up with whom? Catch up with what? The things that they've missed out on are spending time with each other, developing relationships, developing friendships, relaxing in you know, the ways that they enjoy. They've missed out on those things, and particularly because for many of them, home became school and there was no distinction between them. Your parents became your teachers, and you know, my own children spent a lot of time saying to me, going, my real teacher doesn't talk to me like this. And so, you know, they miss that separation between what was, you know, doing things that they needed to do to get on, and, you know, having that more relaxed space to just enjoy themselves. So I think in terms of preparing for the next academic year, the focus of catching up should be catching up on those more fun things, because and Lisa knows a lot more about this in terms of motivation than I do, but we learn best when we're in the right space to learn, and that means being socially connected. It means feeling kind of empowered and not feeling anxious and worried about where you are and where you might need to be. In terms of preparing for the next sort of situation like this, I'm not sure if you said next pandemic or next lockdown. I hope we're not already on to the next pandemic. I'm not quite finished with this.
Oh, I think the next load of whatever that gets thrown at us, you know.
That's I definitely think that the uncertainty is the most difficult part for a lot of people, that you just think, when will this end? What's going to happen? And I think it's okay for us not to have all of the answers. And what we can try and sort of impart to children and young people is this will end, it will get better, but we don't necessarily have a concrete end date. So we need to focus on the present and, managing that rather than on the kind of unknowable future and trying to mitigate every possible outcome. And I think a lot of it as well is about the kinds of coping strategies that we can use as well to manage to do that. And a really, really important one is around positive reframing. So when it's feeling a bit negative, when you're feeling really uncertain and a bit scared, trying to find the positives in that, trying to find the bright spots, essentially. I'm not talking about the people who managed to spend lockdown, learning to play the violin or making banana bread or all of those things. I certainly didn't manage anything like that. But it's about thinking about where the unexpected kind of joys in life still might be. For me, often that was around thinking, right, I'm working from home, I'm homeschooling children, but I'm also getting this opportunity to spend much more time with them than I normally am able to do. I don't have a 90-minute commute, twice a day. So although there was a lot of times when I was tearing my hair out trying to do all of those things, there was a little bright spot as well. We got to sit down and have family dinner together every night. We were in a very privileged position, obviously, to be able to do that. And it won't be the same for everyone. For young people, for my own students, I talk to them about how they're kind of this COVID generation that are going out into the world in this really difficult time of uncertainty, but they've also demonstrated these skills that other young people have not before, that employers are going to find really valuable. The resilience that they've shown in often incredibly difficult circumstances. They're spread all over the world. They're working with very different qualities of workspaces, internet access, all of those kinds of things, and they've managed to do incredibly well. We had a dissertation conference for our finalists this year, and the work that they've done in such difficult circumstances was absolutely incredible. So I think really that sort of trying to focus on the positives, trying to manage the situation as it is at the moment is really key, and kind of trying to stay grounded.
Thank you. Lisa, I'd like to ask you another question now from a member of the public. They're wondering whether you have any views on the age-old debate about social media and well-being. Obviously, a lot of young people have been very using social media really heavily during all of the lockdowns.
Well, I mean, we would need a whole coffee break to talk about social media. And it depends on which aspect of social media, and I think it depends on the aspect that you're looking at and the age group. So certainly for our young adults, so our university students, they've found some very positive uses with social media, where they have used apps to help them keep track of their time and manage their work. But I don't think that's what the question probably wants me to say. I think if we're looking at younger children, I mean, I don't have any, I haven't seen any research coming out about it for this. There's a lot of, generally, a little bit of social media use is fine. If we look at studies that have gone on previously, but too much social media use can be detrimental to well-being and mental health. It's generally can be quite protective for groups that feel more marginalized, because it's a good way of finding people that you have a shared experience with. And I think, but I don't know that there's data to show this, that in those terms, potentially at the moment, social media was a boost in some ways in the beginning, because it allowed people to share how they were feeling and to, enable them to connect with one another. So I think actually, and as a parent myself with a son who started secondary school in September, so in the middle of the pandemic. We would never have got him a smartphone normally for year 7, but we did get him a smartphone because that is how all of the children were connecting with one another. But we've been quite careful in how we've monitored that. So I think it has to be used responsibly. I think we have to be careful with how a lot of apps and social media platforms are not, they're not supposed to be used by children. And I think we have to be mindful of that as parents, and but I think a little bit, if we look at past literature, is okay, but too much can be detrimental.
What do you think, Katie?
I think a lot of what Lisa says resonates, and it also very much depends on the nature of the social media that you're engaging with, because obviously that's a really huge term. And if, as many of us have been over the last year and a bit, have been doing using it as a tool of connection, then actually it's been really, really valuable. It's enabled people to maintain relationships and and to sort of keep a connection with the outside world when it was really difficult to do so. And to go back to that question from a member of the public about different personality types, that's something that kind of plays into that as well, because people who are more extroverted possibly struggled more with that that lack of connection, but also introverts did too, and they just find their connections in different ways. Some people argued that introverted people actually were enjoying it, but nobody particularly enjoyed being locked in their house for 6 weeks, I don't think, because we find our social connection in different ways. I think the issue is when the social media is just enhancing or increasing isolation. If you're engaging with less healthy sort of social media sites, or going down sort of rabbit holes of things without that sort of real person connection to go alongside it, that's where it can become a little bit more problematic. But if you're on WhatsApp or FaceTime, or engaging on a chat board of a special interest then you have, then that can be a really valuable tool for maintaining connection to your kind of normal life and the relationships that you want to maintain within that.
That's really useful to know. We haven't got much time left, so in 60 seconds, Katie, you can start. What would be your top tips for people coping at the moment? What's the best that they can do for children?
I think key to it is keeping those lines of communication open in any way that you can. And going back to what I said about those shared activities, spending time together, sharing hobbies, or cooking or music, anything like that, just to encourage conversations to keep going. Because if they're talking to you about the small things, there's more chance that they're going to talk to you about the big things. And I think that that's a really key that feeds into all of the other kinds of coping strategies that you might want to use as well.
And Lisa, what are your top tips?
Okay, well, I think strong relationships are very protective for us. So I think, like Katie's saying, fostering not necessarily just through dialogue, but through shared experience, boosting our children's self-esteem, their sense of confidence and success. And I think my main message would be kind. Childhood and adolescence can be quite tough anyway, peaks and troughs of difficult times. Everybody's had to make very rapid and huge adjustments over the last 15 months. And what children need, and what we all need to a certain extent, is stability, in our routines and emotionally. And I think we need to be kind to one another, even if we don't understand, when our kids are driving us nuts. I think actually we have to step back and remember that it's been tough, and we just have to look out for one another. It sounds a little bit trite, but we have to just, be kind to one another, whether it's our teachers or our children or each other as colleagues. It is about being kind, I think.
Yeah, and it's perhaps remembering good enough is good enough, isn't it?
Exactly, giving ourselves and each other a bit of a break, and remembering that it's okay to find this hard. But at the same time, if if it's continuously hard, if it's not getting better, if you're finding those coping strategies aren't working for you or they're not working for your children, then it's really important to reach out for help. And it's not, it's not something to be ashamed of. If it's a struggle, then there is help available and you should engage with it.
Yeah, I mean, we're all trained teachers and academics in the main at the Institute of Education, and we found it hard. So
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Okay, well, thank you so much, both of you. We're very sadly out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. And thank you for all your comments and questions. Thank you to our speakers, Lisa Friedkin and Katie Kwai. Stay safe, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.